calling, emailing the university, and literally after a dozen phone calls, he picks up one day. And he is that quintessential nutty professor, all over the place, tough to follow. But he says, what do you want to know about Dr. Munyon? I've been researching his life for 50 years. I'm in the process of writing a biography on him.
Hi there, my name is Cal Evans, and this is Hearts and Tales. Hey, I'm here with Joe and Paul, and they are unique for Hearts and Tales because they don't actually distill. But I ran into Joe at Mardi Gras there in West Palm Beach, and you started telling me the story, and I'm like, I've got to have you guys on because this liqueur or aperitif is so unique that I was like, I got to talk to y'all. Y'all produce Munyon's Paw-Paw.
That's correct.
Okay. So now I'm just going to start asking questions, and whoever wants to answer, just take the mic, okay?
You got it.
Y'all found this in a state park, a visitor center. Walk us through that moment. What did you see what did you feel when you saw this? Did you go, hey, I got to do that?
Yeah, well, I was at John D. MacArthur Beach State Park, which is on the north end of Singer Island up in Palm Beach County. And in between that island, Singer Island, and North Palm Beach, which is the village town on the other side of the intercoastal, there's a tiny little island called Munyon Island. And I'd been there before. I've been in Florida for almost 30 years now. I've been there many times. I didn't know the story. And I was there with the family. And at the visitor center of the state park, which owns the island, there's a display. So I walked in, I saw the display, and we could get into it, but Paul and I have a long history in the liquor industry. I've been with a bunch of different companies, some small, some large multinationals, and always wanted to start our own brand. Had always talked about doing it, love the industry. So we kind of always were keeping our eyes peeled for an opportunity and have some things that we think make a brand a really good concept. And so all of a sudden, I'm in the visitor center, and I look to the corner, and I see this display, and it's got this funny-looking guy with this crazy hat and this, not outlandish, but very captivating, attire. And in that display, it talks about Munyon Island, and there's a glass case, and there's these two bottles in there, a big one and a small one, and these apothecary-looking amber bottles that were clearly old-timey. And so it just caught my eye. And being in the industry, packaging is huge. So I walk over to it, and lo and behold, when I look at the actual label, there's alcohol in there. So I said, alcohol, very cool bottle. I get a little vignette about the story. I'm like, there's a geography, sort of a provincial brand. There's a history. It's got authenticity. And the bottle is eye-catching. It caught my eye. And so I said, I got to call Paul and give him a shout. And I said, Paul, have you ever heard of Munyon Island? Because up in our area, all the locals, a lot of locals will know it. But if you're out and about, maybe 15, 20% of people from that area will actually know Munyon Island. And even a lesser percentage of people actually know the story and the history. So I said, Paul, do you know Munyon Island? He goes, yeah, I know Munyon Island. I said, do you know there was an alcohol associated with it? He said, I had no idea. I was like, you got to come check out this display. So fast forward a couple of weeks probably, we're in front of that display, and Paul's like, well, there's definitely something here. All the elements are in place. There's definitely something here. So it was eye-opening. It was engaging to kind of say, what was that moment like? And it was, we refer to it, and we've talked to people, kind of like an aha moment. So, Paul, anything to add there?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one.
No, that is fascinating. And I am not native, but I am a resident of Palm Beach and Palm Beach County. And I had no idea that Munyon, I knew the park, but I had no idea that was there, and nothing about the history until I ran into you. And, I go to Mardi Gras because my wife likes art, okay? But I always look for the liquor tents.
I like your style.
And I found y'all, and you started going into the story. It was just fascinating. Now, Paul, the two of you have a history in alcohol. And you were telling me earlier that one of the people that you deal with on a regular basis that has her own brand of tequila calls y'all the crazy ones because you know the industry and you still wanted to be in it. Talk to us about why you left the big brands and decided to bet it all on something brand new like this.
Yeah, great question. So, like you mentioned, Joe and I, 20 plus years in the industry, we worked for some startup type companies and then big multinationals. Joe was with Campari Americas that owns a huge portfolio of brands for almost 13 years. I had worked for brands like Macallan, Absolute, Remy. But we always had the entrepreneurial mindset. And, you know, we'd always say to ourselves, and Joe and I started in the industry together at the same company, hey, yeah, they're launching this brand, but maybe we would have done things a little differently. So along the lines, we saw plenty of winners. We saw some losers as well, and just always took notes of what we thought we could do differently. And always had in the back of our mind, too, we'd love to start our own brand. So when Joe came to me with that concept, it was a lot of weekends and nights sort of discussing, hey, can this really work? The good thing about Joe being at Campari for 13 years, we started seeing a European trend with the Aperitif digestives starting to gain momentum in the United States. And, you know, we'll get into the history behind what Dr. Munyon's cure-all elixir was, but we thought that medicinal type flavor profile was really starting to catch on with bars, restaurants here in the United States, and the lower ABV trend, alcohol by volume trend as well. So we thought, hey, okay, we've got an incredible history behind this brand. How do we formulate something that ties in with the history behind the brand that's on trend? And I think that's what we accomplished. But yeah, so, you know, as Joe mentioned, he reached out to me. I saw the display. And then between the two of us, we spent a ton of time at the Historic Society of Palm Beach researching everything we could about this Dr. James Munyon. And we can get into some of the history, but at the turn of the century, he was more famous than the president of the United States.
Wow.
Yeah, he was very atypical of the medicine snake oil salesman of that time.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things I came up with when I was doing the research about this, was he was one of the few snake oil salesman that wasn't actually selling snake oil. This stuff actually had value. So, but now one of the other things that y'all did was you hired a chemist who had spent 50 years researching Dr. Munyon. And what was that conversation like? And what did he tell you that you couldn't have found out any other way?
Well, it was a lot of fun. So the way we found Ned Heindel was his name. He was a professor of chemistry at Lehigh University up in Pennsylvania. And interestingly enough, a lot of things came together. I had one of my best friends growing up went to Lehigh. I grew up about 45 minutes away from there. I had actually spent a summer semester there living with my buddy. So I was very familiar with it. And when we found out Ned was up there, the way that came about is, taking it back to another professor, I was walking in a Publix. So this is a very Florida story. So in Publix of all places, us Floridians know that that's a staple. I bumped into my old history professor from Florida Atlantic University, another state institution. And coincidentally, I saw him. I said, Dr. Strain, you're the perfect person. I've been looking for somebody like you. He goes, what are you talking about? You know? So we're in Publix, and I said, I've been trying to find out information on Dr. James Munyon. He was a prolific Palm Beacher in the early 1900s, but there's not a lot of information on him on the internet. So what would you do as a historian? So he said the first thing I would do, if he's as prominent as you said he was, the Historic Society of Palm Beach County would know about him. So it's downtown West Palm. You got to go there and check it out. So I called Paul. I'm like, hey, here's the lead, because we weren't finding much out about Dr. James Munyon. So we went down there. Sure enough, right away they say, yeah, we know Munyon. He was a character, and here's some information on him. But what you've got to do is you got to come back and meet our archivist, and he'll tell you about it. And there's somebody who's been researching Munyon. He'll go into the whole thing. I was traveling for work because, like Paul said, this was nights and weekends for us. And Paul made an appointment, went down, met the archivist, and they said, you got to meet Ned Heindel. And that was a treasure trove of information at the actual Historic Society. But then meeting Ned was just the crown jewel. So Paul had reached out to him many times. I'll actually let Paul tell this part of the story because he knows it very well.
Yeah, calling, emailing the university, and literally after a dozen phone calls, he picks up one day. And he is that quintessential nutty professor. All over the place, tough to follow, But he says, what do you want to know about Dr. Munyon? I've been researching his life for 50 years. I'm in the process of writing a biography on him. So we speak for over an hour on the phone. I'm jotting down every note I possibly can, trying to follow the story. And at the end of the conversation, I said, hey, Ned, it would really be helpful. You know, my partner and I have been in the liquor business forever. We want to bring Munyon's Paw-Paw back to life. It would really be helpful if we flew up and met with you in person and learned everything we can about this gentleman. And he said, just name the date. So about a month and a half, 2 months later, we fly up to Easton, Pennsylvania, meet Ned in a pub. And on the flight up there, I say to Joe, look, if he's been writing this book for 50 years, the chances of it ever getting published are probably slim to none. So let's see if he'll give us a transcript of the book when we go up there. So we sit down at the pub, order a beer, and he goes, I'm almost done with the book. Here's the transcript.
Wow.
And without us even asking, he throws it in front of us. And so we sat there all afternoon with him. It was, we wouldn't be where we are today without Ned's help. But also at that meeting, we told him we had some bottles that with the cork still in there, the original formulation, and his eyes lit up and he said, no one's analyzed this stuff since the early 1900s. Extract a sample and send it up to me. So we did that. His book did get published just about 3 years ago. We have a copy here with us today, but in the book is my neighbor extracting a sample. We send it up to him to analyze, and he calls us back and he goes, yes, you guys aren't going to believe this. Yes, there was papaya in there. So Floridians used to refer to papaya as Paw-Paw. That's where the name came from. Yes, there's papaya in there. Yes, there's alcohol. And depending on the year, it was between 15 and 24%. And to the surprise of Ned, Joe, and myself, there was also THC in the stuff. And his slogan was a cure for whatever else you have.
Yeah, I bet it was.
Yeah, and he was prescribing this to anyone that was 5 or older, selling millions of bottles a year. So
now, did y'all keep the THC in your original recipe now?
We have not. The federal government, although the THC is on trend right now, they don't, and probably if they're right on this one, they don't allow you to mix alcohol and THC in a cocktail. In a beverage at this point.
I can understand that. I'm not sure that I can see the wisdom in it, but I understand why they would say that. So what did y'all do with that? Because Dr. Munyon was prescribing this stuff to anybody over 5 years old. Now that you know what was in it, have y'all publicized that? THC free or something like that. What did y'all do with all this information now that y'all had it?
So it's funny because there was a lot coming together, and beginning a brand, as you guys touched on earlier, it's almost like a lot about the liquor industry. That's good. It's also intimidating because it's a difficult industry to be in. But it's what we're passionate about and what we have our experience in. But there's a lot of different things that kind of came together and, hey, do we do this? Do we take the leap? Advice from friends. And when we heard that part of the story, amongst many other things, Munyon was a fascinating character. Real gregarious, real outgoing, rags to riches story. He had this great life. It was a story in and of himself. He was like the hero of the story, and it was really fascinating. And we were thinking of how to bring it back, and we knew a brand had to have authenticity and a good story. And then when we heard the THC thing, we just said, all right, we got to do this. We're not going to put the THC in there. We don't know that business. Paul touched on it, legalities and whatnot. But this is just too great of a story. So how we've brought it back, we don't have a THC version. People tell us that all the time. You need to put the THC back in or do a separate one. But how we've brought it back is, we're in the liquor business, but we're also in the story business. We're in the celebratory, but anybody in the liquor industry is in the celebratory business, getting together, doing this, and it's a really, really good story to talk about. So we tell it, we bring it about, people love it. It always gets a rise out of everybody, and it's funny, when we tell people that we don't have THC in today's formula, I always say I'm going to lose half my audience, but stick with me here. So we bring it back in the banter and in the story. We don't have the THC in the product, though.
Well, now you were talking about storytelling and packaging and everything. Y'all you put all the ingredients on the label, but the label folds out and you actually tell Dr. Munyon's story back there. Why go to that kind of level of detail?
Well, one of the things is that in our industry, it is dominated by major multinationals with deep, deep pockets, and you have to be able to differentiate yourself some way. and we're not going to be able to outspend them, right? And we're not going to be able to get out there and tell our story with the budgets that they have. So you need to come up with clever ways to get your story across, and you need to come up with clever points of differentiation. So Paul had mentioned I was at Campari for over a decade, so I was very familiar with Aperitif, Campari, Aperol. But two of the questions that I would always get when we were talking about Aperol or Campari are, one, what's in it? And they don't tell you. I was like, hey, if you find out, let me know. I've worked with them for almost 12 years now at that point. I don't know, so let me know. So it was an interesting point where they won't tell what it is. And a lot of these brands will say, hey, this is a secret, and it's, only 2 people know the recipe and they can't fly in the same plane together or whatnot, And it's more marketing lure and keeping some things hidden than it is actual reasoning. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that I would get is, hey, is it all natural? And I'd be like, how do I change the subject without being deceitful here? But it wasn't all natural.
Yeah.
So the two things that we had to do, we thought, hey, let's make it all natural, and then let's come up with this innovative label and tell our story. But I'll let Paul tell the story about actually getting the label and then go into some more detail about the product here.
Okay.
Yeah, so, we knew we wanted to list all ingredients on the product, on the package. We didn't know how we were going to accomplish that. We talked about a neck hanger or something along those lines. And then we went to tour a label manufacturing facility, and we met with them. We were talking about the type of label we want and everything else. At the end of the meeting, they said, hey, we can go check out the production floor if you'd like. It's not as sexy as a liquor bottling line, but, and Joe and I said, hey, we're here. We might as well go check it out. So they were running Fireball labels. It was a big operation. And then the last machine we came to buy, we weren't even going to stop at it. And I saw 2 labels being folded together. And I asked the gentleman that was giving us the tour, I said, what is that? And he goes, oh, those are caulk labels. A caulk, you can open up the back label and you have all the warnings and how to use it and everything else. And I said, could you do that on a liquor label? And they said, well, no one's ever asked us to do that, but I don't see why we couldn't. So that was our, okay, we're onto something. It took us almost 6 months for the Tax and Trade Bureau. They have a COLA, certificate of label approval process, and we had to go back and forth with them. And we didn't think we were going to get it approved, but anyway, we're the first brand out there that has that back label approved. And just like you said, you can open it up. There's a little saying from Dr. Munyon there, and then all 14 ingredients are shown there as well. Cool. And it's we don't openly advertise that, but it's really cool going into a bar or restaurant and you have a mixologist loving the brand and say, hey, were you aware that you can see all the ingredients by opening up the back label? And that just takes it to another level.
That is cool. Well, now, speaking of bartenders, I did the Dr. Munyon's Paw-Paw has been described if Grand Marnier and Aperol had a baby. And when I had it, we're sitting there, you're in your tent, and I put on my best aficionado, and I took it and I sniffed it, and you wanted to mix it. I'm like, no, let's taste it. And I tasted it. Actually, it was pretty good. I enjoyed that. But how do you sell a bartender on, what is basically just an add-on to a cocktail?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's funny that Aperol and Grand Marnier had a baby. I actually got that line from a bartender, and it was perfect because we sampled him on it. He tasted it, and he goes, "This is like 2 of my favorite products had a baby." And I said, "What are those?" He goes, "Grand Marnier and Aperol." And the funny thing is, my experience at Campari, they own Grand Marnier and Aperol. They're 2 of my favorite products. I said, that line is gold. I'm going to use it. And everybody says, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We always say it's like tasting of it's like a Florida orange grove on the front end with lingering bitter notes on the back end. But that's a good way for people who are familiar with those brands to understand what's coming. Yeah. So to go and talk to a mixologist or a bartender, when you're in a craft cocktail venue, the bartenders, you let them taste it. You kind of give the description that I just gave, and they're off to the races. The wheels start turning, and they say, oh, I could use this like in a paper plane. I could use this in a spritz. I could use this in a margarita. And then they go with some more classic cocktails. Oh, how does it taste in a Negroni? Things like that. So they're off to the races. For the bartenders that are in more of the high volume, less craft, we kind of walk them through what I just said. Hey, Aperol, Grand Marnier, so start. And we had another mixologist, Bootleg Greg, who's up in our neck of the woods in Palm Beach County, done some incredible programs. He said this is what you need as a bartender to be an elevated triple sec. Nobody comes in and says, hey, can I have triple sec on the rocks? Just doesn't happen. Nobody wants that. It's just an additive, but it's not a nuanced additive that's going to elevate your cocktails. So Bootleg says, I'm using this instead of triple sec.
Yeah.
And then another great mixologist, Miles Standish. Standish Cocktails is his name on Instagram, but his name's Miles Robinson, and he's fantastic. He started calling it the glue, one of the glues that makes a cocktail come together. So with those endorsements, that's what we kind of hear what the bartender community is saying to us, and then we use that because they're the experts. So, Paul, anything to add on that?
No, I mean, we mentioned that we saw this trend in Europe with these types of flavor profiles catching on into the United States as well. One thing that's trending here, as I'm sure you know, is the lower ABV, but also the mid ABV cocktails. So it's a big thing in Europe right now. So one of the ways we pitch Munyons to bars, restaurants that are not those mixology type places is you can make a killer margarita with a split base Munyons and tequila, and your ABV, your total ABV, will be less than 20%. So it's a mid-proof cocktail, which is on trend in Europe, and it's starting to become on trend here in the United States. Some of your biggest cocktail bars here in the United States are starting to put the alcohol percentage of the cocktail next to the cocktail.
Yeah.
So that's another way it's being utilized.
Very cool. And I can't see where it would set bartenders apart, and I tend not to go to the bars that have the high volume stuff like that. I tend to go to the places where the bartender will come up and talk to you, and and I've had more than one go, "Hey, let me show you something," and he'll give me something to try. That's how I fell in love with the aviation. Sure. So, so I could see where this was, and in a margarita, I hadn't even thought of that. I'm gonna have to go home this weekend now and try that. So
there you go.
Now, Dr. Munyon was famous. His slogan was "There's hope." There's pictures of him pointing to the sky. Y'all turned that into the Hope the Hope Association. Talk to us about what that is. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Munyon was, I mentioned, fascinating character, and he was way ahead of his time, not only in putting THC in his beverage, but way ahead of his time just from a marketing standpoint. So I mentioned kind of rags to riches story, got into a bunch of businesses. He hit pay dirt with Munyon's homeopathic remedy company. And prior to that, he was in publishing. And the way he got into the homeopathic remedy company was that he noticed that these homeopathic remedy, the patent medicine men, those companies were advertising the most in his periodicals, and they were spending the most money and paying on time, writing the checks. And he goes, man, there must be something here. So he started investing in them, and then he launched his own. And his history was marketing, publishing, dealing with advertisements. So he was way ahead of his time. And one of the things that he did was he started the Hope Association. And it was sort of a precursor to these subscription models. So for $1 a year, which is about $40 now, you could become a member of the Hope Association. You would get the rights to write in at the time. And Munyon wasn't a real doctor, although he called himself one. But he did have a team of legitimate physicians that worked for him. And they would provide you, they look at your symptoms and provide you a prescription for one of the Munyon's remedies, right? And oftentimes it was Munyon's Paw-Paw. And so he had that. You would get a guide to health, and you would also get a pin. Paul's going to show you the pin right here.
Original pin from 1903.
Wow, that is cool.
His finger pointing in the air saying "There's hope." So yeah.
Yeah. So that was his great salutation, finger in the air. There is hope. Called it the Hope Association. He was filled with these incredible quotes. One of them was, "I'd rather heal a nation than be its ruler." So he just was the quintessential marketer, and this Hope Association was one of those great marketing tools. And we saw that, and Paul came up with the idea, hey, why don't we get a pin? We recreate this pin, and people can join the Hope Association. So if you go onto our website, you get a replica of the original pin. Wow. You get a little postcard, another little gift, and then once a month we don't blast anybody's emails and fill it with spam, but once a month you get an email with a nice kind message. Munyon was also a great songwriter. He actually had a couple of songs that were in the running to be the national anthem. So fascinating character. So we write a little poem, and then it gives you a recipe to try. One of the times it was the margarita, but then you're a bona fide member of the Hope Association. So that's where that came from.
That is so cool. Okay. Oh, you want to add
No,
to that?
I think you hit all the main points.
Munyon's been gone for 100 years now, and you're helping to bring him back. But where does this go? I mean, how big can a papaya-based aperitif really get?
Good question. So, look, in a very challenging market, the brand continues to exceed all of our expectations. So, we're up 60% again this year. We've got some great accounts coming on board, like the Universal Studios, but also Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines.
Nice.
So we think, and as I mentioned, Joe and I do a lot of these tastings, activations ourselves, and we always start off with, it's an aperitif. Okay. 90% of the folks still have no idea what that flavor profile is like here in the United States. And then we'll say, well, do you know the Aperol Spritz or do you know Negroni? And still 90% of the folks don't know that. So we think there's still tremendous upside for this category. And yes, there's papaya in there, but we like to describe it as it's really like walking through a Florida orange grove on the front end. So yes, papaya, orange, grapefruit, and then you get those bittering notes on the backside as well. So, our vision of this thing is continue to grow the way we've been growing here in Florida and then continue to expand outside the state as well. One of our signature cocktails is, we call it the Palm Beach Spritz. It's with Prosecco and grapefruit soda, and we're seeing a lot of traction behind that cocktail right now as well. Lower ABV, Spritz, checks a lot of those boxes. So,
it's funny when we got that question pretty early on, actually, from our distributor. Okay, you've got this sort of provincial tied to Florida. It's a local aperitif. How big can that get? And I said, well, the goal is to get it as big as a small handcrafted vodka from a little town called Austin, Texas could get. So if there's a possibility there, then there's a possibility with the Florida aperitif.
That's a great story, a great way to end this. Joe, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I know y'all are busy, and there's probably much better ways you could spend a Friday after or Friday morning. So thank you for coming down here and telling us about Munyon's Paw-Paw. Audience, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Hey, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe button so that you'll get every episode. We publish one a month, and we'd love to make sure that you get them all. Thank you so much. We'll see you next month right here on Hearts and Tales.